The snow came down in soft flurries that morning, like ashes shaken from heaven. It dusted the wooden platform of Coldwater Station and gathered in the corners of windows, the creases of long coats, the lashes of women waiting with their gloved hands wrapped around hope. The steam engine had hissed off half an hour ago, leaving behind an echo and one girl who would not move. Loretta Vale stood alone by the depot's crooked fence, her carpet bag at her boots and a letter crushed in her hand. Her brown traveling cloak had grown stiff at the hem from snowmelt. She was not crying. Not anymore. She had done all her weeping during the ride from Missouri, when the pine hills had blurred past and her sister's silence filled the space beside her like a ghost. The letter she held was the one she'd written 2 nights before, unsigned, just 2 words scribbled on fine paper: I decline. A man stood a few paces ahead of her, arms folded, heavy overcoat buttoned to the chin. Boone called her. The rancher. He was larger than she remembered from his photo. Broad, older, with thick shoulders and a face carved deep with wind lines. His gray-streaked beard caught flakes like moss clinging to stone. His eyes, blue and narrow, searched her face not for beauty but for obedience. Loretta met his gaze and said softly, I won't go with you. Boone didn't flinch. You came all this way. I did. You agreed to marry. I changed my mind. His jaw clenched. You think I'm too old? Too fat? She didn't answer. The truth was she'd known all those things from the photograph. She had steeled herself for them. What she hadn't expected was the transaction of it all, the way he spoke of a wife like she was a piece of fencing or a mule to be traded for labor. He had not asked her name, only confirmed her age. A gust of wind swept between them. Boone stepped back. Suit yourself. He turned, walked toward the hitched wagon, and climbed in without another word. As the wheels crunched off into the white, Loretta didn't call out. She only watched him vanish down the road toward the Calder estate, alone. She stayed there for an hour, arms wrapped around herself while the snow thickened. By dusk, the station master took pity and let her sleep on a wooden bench inside. She curled her body into the curve of her satchel and closed her eyes. But sleep was a cruel thing. Every time she drifted, she saw her mother's face, already buried in Missouri soil. And behind that, the letter her father had burned when she said she wanted something different from what he'd arranged. She was 22. And in that cold little depot she felt ancient and used up. The next morning the light came in slow through the frost-rimmed window. She stirred, stiff and sore, then sat up and blinked. Someone stood across from her. You look awful, Maybelle said. Loretta exhaled. So do you. Maybelle Vale was younger by 3 years, but had always seemed older somehow, quieter, sharper-eyed. Her cheeks were wind pink and her gloves too big, and her coat hung wrong like it belonged to someone else. What are you doing here? Loretta asked. I read your letter. Maybelle held up the paper. You never posted it. You tucked it under your mattress. Loretta stared. So you read it, packed a bag, and followed me halfway across the country? You were about to waste a perfectly good chance just because you got scared. I wasn't scared. Yes, you were. Maybelle stepped closer. You say no to men like him because it makes you feel powerful. But you still end up alone in the snow. Loretta stood, her voice low and trembling. You don't understand. I understand that it was never about him being fat, Loretta. You just hated that he didn't try to charm you. The silence after that cut deeper than the cold. Maybelle glanced out the depot window. Is it true? That he didn't even ask your name? Loretta nodded. Then maybe I'll ask him mine. What? I'm going to take your place. You can't. Watch me. Loretta's hands shook. Maybelle, don't do this out of pity. I'm not. I'm doing this because I've spent my whole life waiting for something to change. And maybe this is it. Maybe it's not love. But it's a roof. A fire. A place that doesn't ask me to be less. Loretta's eyes filled. He wanted someone to marry, not someone to know. Maybelle smiled, sad and small. Then maybe I'll teach him. Outside, the wind stirred snow into whirls. A postboy trotted by with a telegram, but the Vale sisters didn't look up. Something quiet had already been decided. Boone Calder wasn't expecting anyone when he returned to town that afternoon. But there she stood near the hitch post, cheeks red, gloves damp from travel. I'm Maybelle, she said, looking him square in the eyes. Boone blinked. You're not. No, she cut in, I'm not Loretta. But you paid for a bride. And I came in her place. He looked at her, really looked. His face gave nothing away. Then slowly he nodded. The wagon ride back to the estate was wordless. Just the groan of the axles and the creak of the seat under Boone's weight and the slow thaw of fear inside Maybelle's chest. She did not feel chosen. But she did feel something else, like a match lit in the dark. She did not speak. Nor did he. But as they passed a pair of townsfolk who turned to whisper and point, Maybelle straightened her back and folded her hands like a lady. A veil woman, yes. But no one's ghost. When they reached the house, Boone handed her down from the wagon with a hand like bark, rough, impersonal, steady. Inside, the hall was dim and smelled of smoke and oil. A room had already been made. The bed was dressed, the fire built high. She turned toward him. "Thank you," she said. Boone gave a grunt. "There's stew in the kitchen." Then he walked down the corridor, boots loud on the pine boards. Maybelle shut the door behind her and exhaled. It was the first time in her life she had been somewhere she did not belong, and stayed anyway. Out the window, snow fell like a benediction. Inside, she unpacked slowly. Her hands found the edges of her life. A comb. A book. A scarf her mother had stitched before illness took her. Then she lay down and let the room settle around her. Not warm, not yet, but hers. Or something close to it. Outside, the wind had picked up again. But the letter that changed the wind had already been written. Already carried. Already burned. And Maybelle had taken its ashes and turned them into something entirely new. Something that looked, if you tilted your head just right, almost like hope. The morning after her arrival, Maybelle woke to a silence so complete it felt like a verdict. The room smelled of cedar and soot. Frost trimmed the window panes like lace, and beyond them, the world was white and wide and uninviting. She sat up slowly, drawing the blanket close. The fire had gone out sometime in the night. No one had come to stir it. She dressed without ceremony, hands numb from the cold. The cloak she wore still bore the faint scent of train smoke. Boone's house, though solidly built, was quiet in a way that made her feel watched even when she was alone. The hallway creaked underfoot as she stepped into it. She passed closed doors, a wall hung with old rifles, and a long mirror that caught her reflection when she wasn't looking for it. She stopped. Then turned away. In the kitchen, a woman stirred a pot with the slow grace of someone who had done it 1,000 mornings in 1,000 winters. Gray hair pulled back in a knot, shoulders square. Her name, Maybelle would soon learn, was Enid. And she did not smile. "You're the sister." "I am." "Boone's not back yet. He rides out early." Maybelle nodded. "Can I help with anything?" Enid glanced her up and down. "Don't know what you're used to doing." Maybelle didn't reply. Instead, she took a bowl from the shelf, poured her own coffee, and sat at the wooden table. She didn't ask permission. That was something Loretta would have done. Outside, snow coated the porch rail in smooth drifts. A bird had left tiny prints on the windowsill. Somewhere in the distance, a horse's hooves broke the quiet. Boone entered just past sunrise, shoulders powdered with snow, coat unbuttoned and breathing hard. He glanced at Maybelle but said nothing to her. His nod was for Enid. She served his plate in silence. Maybelle sat straight, spoon untouched. She waited for his eyes to meet hers. They didn't. Eventually he spoke. "You'll need boots if you're walking the grounds." "I thought I wouldn't be expected to," she answered softly, not defiant, just stating a fact. "You're not expected to. But snow here lasts half the year. A body can only sit so long before the mind rots." She nodded, understanding him more than he realized. That day Maybelle explored the estate. It was a solemn place, the Calder Ranch, large, efficient, unloved. Fences were repaired but plain. Animals were healthy but wary. There were no flowers, no paint, no small touches that said someone cared for the look of a place, only its yield. She walked alone. Past the barn. Past the sloped hill that led to the creek now frozen in place. And when she stood beside the fence post overlooking the valley, the sky opened up, cloudless and pale as milk. She did not know yet what kind of man Boone was. Only that he had built his world to keep people out, and then invited her in because he thought it wouldn't matter. That night, Maybelle mended linens by the fire while Boone read a ledger by lantern light. Enid sat at the table, darning socks with thin lips pressed together like she was holding back commentary from 10 years ago. "I'd like to contribute," Maybelle said quietly. Enid raised her brow. "You're contributing just fine sitting there." Boone didn't look up. "You'll find ways." "I already have hands," Maybelle said. "They work. I'd like to use them." Still no answer. Just the quiet scratch of pencil and wind against the eaves. Later, Maybelle crept back to her room with a strange weight in her chest. Not sadness, not quite. More like waiting. As if something inside her had been packed too tightly, and now she had to walk carefully until it settled. 3 days passed. The town, when she visited it on Boone's supply wagon, was made of people who pretended to squint kindly before turning cold once her back was turned. She heard whispers behind hands. The sister. The second. The one who stayed. A girl at the general store pretended not to hear her question. An older man laughed when Boone introduced her, not as a wife but as Maybelle Vale, staying on the estate. The shame was dull but persistent. Like a stone in her shoe. Not enough to cripple her, just enough to remind her where she did not belong. But Maybelle did not wilt. Each day she swept floors, learned to prepare feed, wrote short letters she never sent. Each night she listened for Boone's voice, hoping he might one day use it on her the way a man uses his voice when he wants to be known. One morning she found a pair of boots left outside her door. Worn but cleaned. Lined with rabbit fur. Boone never mentioned them. But she wore them. That week, while cutting kindling near the barn, Maybelle slipped and tore her palm on the axe's edge. Boone was passing with a saddle thrown over his shoulder. He paused. Said nothing. But later that evening, she found a roll of bandage and a tin of ointment placed neatly beside her plate. It was not affection. Not yet. But it was a language she understood. Quiet, practical, awkward. That night Enid asked, not unkindly, "Why'd your sister back out?" Maybelle didn't answer at first. She stirred the stew and watched the fire hiss. She was afraid she'd disappear, she finally said. And I was afraid I wouldn't. Enid snorted. You're braver than you look. I don't feel brave. Most brave folks don't. Later, Boone sat in his reading chair while Maybelle took out her embroidery. Her fingers trembled more than she liked. The needlework was uneven, the thread puckering in places. Boone watched for a while. Then, without glancing up from his ledger, he murmured, "You're using the wrong tension." Maybelle blinked. You sew? No. But I watch. That was the first time she smiled at him. And he saw it. That evening the wind howled. The fire threw amber shadows across the log walls. Maybelle lingered longer than usual in the parlor. She didn't want to go back to the cold room just yet. Boone didn't send her away. A few nights later she heard him speak her name aloud for the first time. Not sharply. Not softly either. Just plainly. Maybelle, the front fence is drifting. I'll need your help come morning. And something in her, some tight, cold thing, melted just a little. A week passed. Then one night while walking past the sitting room, Maybelle heard Enid speaking in low tones. She's not her. You know that. Boone grunted. I know. You planning to marry her? She's here. She won't stay if you don't let her in. She hasn't left. That was all he said. But it was the longest conversation Maybelle had heard from him yet. Later that evening, as she folded towels by the fire, Boone sat in the chair opposite her, coat still damp from snow. He looked at her hands. Then said, You remind me of someone. She waited. My mother. Maybelle didn't answer. She didn't know how to. But inside, something like pride stirred in her chest. Not romantic, not grand, but rooted. Solid. She realized then that she had stopped trying to belong in Loretta's story. She was beginning to write her own. The next morning, Boone saddled his horse. As Maybelle handed him his gloves, their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away. I'll be back before supper. I'll keep a plate warm. It wasn't intimacy. It was something older than that. Quieter. Like seeds sleeping beneath the snow. When he rode off, Maybelle turned toward the porch and watched the valley breathe under a pale blue sky. She hugged her coat around her and listened, not for praise, not for longing, but for the stillness inside her that no longer felt like fear. In someone else's story she had arrived uninvited. But here now she was beginning to shape the tale with her own hands. And the land, as it always does for those who wait and weather, began, slowly, to make space for her. The cold had a different voice that week, no longer whispering but warning. The kind of wind that split lips, iced wells, and scabbed over windows with frost so thick it blurred the world into shapes and shadows. Boone said little about it, only checked the barn twice a day and rode longer than usual, his horse returning glazed with sweat beneath its frozen mane. Maybelle watched him from the porch each evening, coat drawn tight, mittens stiff with wear. He returned later and later, face ruddy from the elements, jaw clenched as if the land had bitten him and he refused to flinch. The third night he didn't come home at all. She paced the parlor in silence, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. Enid muttered something about foolish men and left stew on the stove, but didn't ask questions. Not aloud. By dawn, Maybelle had slept in the rocker by the fire, eyes dry but heavy, hands still clutched around the thin scarf she'd half knit in the quiet hours. Then came the clatter of hooves. The front door opened with a bang. Boone stumbled in, limping and half-frozen, face scraped, shirt bloodied near the shoulder. Horse slipped near the ravine, he said through chattering teeth. Maybelle didn't speak. She moved. Enid brought a blanket. Maybelle cleared the table. The wound wasn't deep, but ugly, a tear across the upper arm, raw and bright. She peeled his coat off carefully, her fingers sure despite the tremble in her gut. "You should have sent someone," she whispered. "There's no one else to send." Her hand stilled at that. He looked away. Later, when the wound was dressed and Boone lay in bed, pale and too still, Maybelle sat beside him with a damp cloth and a lamp turned low. His breathing was shallow but steady. Around midnight he stirred, brow furrowing, words tangled in a dream. "Loretta." Maybelle closed her eyes. When she opened them she leaned closer and said softly, "No. I'm not her. And I don't want to be." The room swallowed the words. Boone didn't wake. But the air changed, less like regret, more like reckoning. For 3 days he drifted in and out of sleep. Maybelle stayed. She changed the bandage, warmed broth, read aloud from one of the books he'd left near the fire weeks ago. Not because he asked. Because she wanted to understand him better than he'd ever tried to understand her. On the second night she found a bird carving beside the hearth, half-shaped, rough with knife marks. She held it for a long while. There was no signature. Just the faint impression of a man trying to make something small and quiet out of his hands. By the 4th day he woke clearer. Ate slowly. Said thank you. She only nodded. "You ought not to go riding alone." His reply was almost a smile. "Didn't plan to fall." "You never do." That evening Maybelle brought her sewing to the parlor again. Boone sat across from her, arm in a sling, watching the fire like it owed him answers. "You ever get tired of being strong?" he asked. "All the time," she said. He looked at her hands. The stitchwork was better now. Straighter. Sure. He gestured toward it. "You taught yourself." "There wasn't anyone else." Boone leaned back. "That's something we have in common." And just like that, a door opened, not with a creak or a grand gesture but a shift in the air. Not love. Not even affection. But recognition. The next day Boone sat at the window sharpening his knife while Maybelle shelled beans. The silence between them was not heavy anymore, it was companionable. Outside, gossip walked faster than any horse. A boy from town brought supplies and let slip what others were saying. Boone Calder had brought the wrong sister, and she was playing nurse to earn her keep. Maybelle heard. So did Boone. Neither said a word. But that night, Boone built a shelf in the parlor, a small one fitted into the corner beside the rocking chair. It held 3 books. 2 were hers. She didn't cry. She sat down and opened the top one. Winter stretched on. The days blurred. Boone healed. Slowly. Steadily. He didn't say much, but he stopped writing so far. Sometimes he walked the fence line with her, pointing out where the frost ate into the wood and how to pack dirt around the posts once the thaw came. One morning, while she brushed a layer of snow off the porch rail, he handed her a small wrapped bundle. Inside, a pair of gloves. Not store-bought. Stitched by hand. The seams weren't perfect, but the lining was warm. "I remember you said yours didn't fit right," he said, gruff. She turned the gloves over. "Did you make these?" "I tried." She slid them on. "They're perfect." He nodded once as if afraid saying more might undo it. Then he said softer, "I don't always know how to show things." "You don't have to," she answered. "You just did." They stood there a long while, side by side in the snow. The fire came later, not flames but a warmth that built slowly between shared silences and small things. It showed up in the way Boone poured her coffee before his own. In the way she laid out his coat each morning without comment. In how she moved through the house as if she belonged. And then, the day she finally snapped. They were in town. Boone needed wire. She went to the mercantile for thread. 2 women near the stove, both ranch wives, fell silent when she passed. "She's the substitute," one muttered. "She's not even his wife," said the other. Maybelle turned. "I may be someone's sister," she said. "But I didn't come here to be a ghost." They stared. She walked out. When Boone found her standing beside the wagon, cheeks burning in the cold, he said nothing. Until they got home. Then as she unwrapped her scarf he said, "You don't owe them anything." "No," she agreed. "But I owe myself the truth." Boone leaned against the doorframe, watching her like he saw her fully for the first time. "Then speak it," he said. She took a long breath. "I want to stay. Not as a favor. Not as your shadow. I want a life of my own. If this is it, I want it to be mine." Boone didn't move. Then he said simply, "Then stay." That night, she placed the bird carving on the new shelf. Later, she found him watching her from the hallway. Not approaching. Just there. Steady as always. And in that moment, something inside her, something small and long-starved, finally caught fire. It wasn't love. But it was the start of something that could one day earn the name. The snow began to thaw, but winter had not surrendered. It clung to the fields in pale sheets and shaded hollows, like a houseguest unwilling to take the hint. The air still bit at dawn. Icicles hung like glass teeth from the eaves. But there were hints of change. Muddy ruts where boots pressed, birds flitting low, and the sharp, wet scent of ground beginning to wake beneath it all. Inside the Calder estate, the fire no longer needed to roar to keep the rooms warm. Maybelle rose earlier than before, not from duty but rhythm. Her steps had learned the creak of the hallway, the weight of the kettle, the drawer where Enid kept the good spoons. She was no longer a guest. Boone sat across from her one morning, sipping coffee as she braided her hair at the table, and asked, "Do you miss your sister?" Maybelle didn't look up. Sometimes. Mostly the way we were as girls. Before the world taught her to be sharper than she wanted to be. Boone nodded. "You're not like her." No. But she wasn't wrong either. She knew she didn't want this life. He studied her face. "And you do." She paused, then smiled faintly. "I didn't think I would. But some things grow better in snow than in sun. You just have to wait." Boone's eyes lingered on her longer than usual. That same day a rider came. Telegram in hand. Maybelle read it by the fire. Her fingers went cold even before she'd finished. "Coming to retrieve you. Room and carriage." Oh. Boone entered the room moments later, brushing snow from his sleeves. "You all right?" She held out the note. He read it once, then set it on the mantel. "She thinks I'm still yours to claim or return," Maybelle said. "She's not wrong to care. She's wrong to think I haven't made a choice." Boone stood silent. The lamp flickered between them. "I didn't keep you here," he said. "No," she agreed. "You didn't keep me. But you never asked me to stay either." His voice was quieter now. Would it have mattered? It might have. They didn't speak again that evening. Maybelle packed slowly. Not because she intended to leave, but because she didn't yet know what staying would require. Her coat. Her scarf. The gloves he made. She folded each one and placed them beside the bird carving on her bedside table. That night, Boone didn't eat at the table. She found him in the barn, tightening the straps on a saddle that hadn't moved all winter. She stood in the doorway, breath fogging in the cold. "Loretta always filled the room," he said without turning. "When she refused, I thought maybe the sister would be quieter. Easier. But you came here with your own fire." "I came here with nothing," she said. "But I'm leaving with something." He looked over his shoulder. "Are you leaving?" "I don't know yet. Is there anything I can say that would make you stay?" She stepped forward. "You already said it. Every time you made space for me." They stood there for a long moment. Not moving. Not needing to. When Maybelle returned to the house, she sat by the fire and began a letter. Not to Loretta but to herself. The next morning a carriage pulled into the yard. Loretta Vale stepped out, draped in fur and pride, eyes narrowing as she took in the ranch, the porch, the way Maybelle stood tall in her apron with snow in her braid. "You look tired," Loretta said. "I've been working." Loretta hesitated. "You don't have to do this." "I know." "Then come home." Maybelle stepped closer. "I am home." Behind them, Boone appeared on the porch. He did not interrupt. He watched. As always. Loretta's eyes flicked from her sister to the man behind her. "You care for him?" Maybelle didn't answer with words. Just the way she stood. Firm. Unapologetic. "I won't beg you," Loretta said. "You never did." And then, in a rare moment of quiet grace, Loretta nodded. She turned back to the carriage, pausing only once to glance at Boone. He inclined his head. She left without ceremony. The yard fell silent again, save for the crunch of the carriage wheels fading into the snow. Boone came down the steps. Maybelle stood at the gate, her hands bare despite the cold. He stopped beside her. "You didn't have to prove anything." "I wasn't proving," she said. "I was choosing." She looked up at him. "I'll stay. But not as your sister-in-law. Not as a replacement." "Then how?" "As myself." He held her gaze. "That's all I ever wanted." "No. It isn't," she said. "But it's a start." That night she placed her things back in the drawers. Not with urgency but care. Later, Boone came to the parlor with a book in hand. He held it out to her. "Thought you might like this one." She opened it. Inside the cover, written in ink, "For Maybelle who stayed." She didn't cry. But she touched the page like it meant something sacred. Spring would come slowly. But she had time now. There were seeds in the soil beneath the snow waiting. And one by one they'd rise. The storm rolled in without warning, the sky collapsing into a slate-colored roar that swallowed the prairie whole. Snow pelted the windows sideways, hard as thrown rice, and the barn shutters beat like drums in the wind. Boone moved through it like a man who had known worse, lantern in hand, coat pulled tight across his shoulders, eyes narrowed against the sting of it. Maybelle watched from the porch, her breath catching as he vanished into the white. She hadn't seen him that angry before, not loud but taut, quiet in a way that shook the room. It had started that morning when Boone received a letter from Harlan Finch, a rancher with too much land and too little patience. Harlan wanted Boone's northern acres. The boundary line was blurred, the soil frozen, but Harlan made it clear. Boone either signed the parcel over or prepared to defend it. Boone refused. Let him come, he'd said. Maybelle had stood at the stove, steadying her voice. Do you want to fight? No, Boone answered. But I won't be pushed. Now, in the middle of the worst storm of the season, Finch had come. He rode in with 2 men behind him, their horses heavy with frost, their mouths full of bravado. Boone met them in the yard. No gun. Just his coat, his word, and the kind of silence that made men hesitate. Maybelle stood in the doorway, a shawl over her shoulders, heart lodged in her throat. You've got a girl playing house in there now? Harlan sneered. Is that what softened you? Boone's voice cut clean through the wind. Say what you came to say. I came to say you've got till spring thaw to get off that land. You're not the man you were, Calder. Everyone sees it. Boone took a step forward. No, I'm not. But you should be glad for that. Harlan laughed. What's she gonna do? Bake me into peace. Maybelle stepped down from the porch. She didn't run. Didn't raise her voice. Just moved forward until she stood beside Boone in the snow. She's gonna stand here, Boone said, with her back straight and her name her own. And that's more than you've ever done. Harlan's smirk faltered. Boone's voice softened, but the steel remained. You want the land? File a claim. Until then, ride home before the storm buries your pride along with your saddle. The silence that followed was heavy, sharp as flint. Then Harlan spat in the snow, turned his horse and left without a word. Boone didn't move until they disappeared into the white. Then he looked at Maybelle. You didn't have to come out. Yes, I did. He nodded once, something shifting in his eyes. Not gratitude. Not surprise. Just belief. They walked back to the porch, boots crunching through the snow, shoulders nearly brushing but not quite. That night, the house held a stillness different from before. Not empty. Not waiting. Just at peace. Maybelle brewed tea. Boone lit the lamps. Enid didn't say a word, but when she passed Maybelle in the kitchen, she touched her arm, gentle, brief, uncharacteristic. I hope you know what you're doing, she said. Maybelle smiled. I finally do. The storm lasted 3 days. They didn't speak much, but their silences had a warmth now, a rhythm. Boone mended a broken hinge. Maybelle baked bread with clumsy fingers that somehow got the job done. In the evenings they read by the fire. Not together, not always, but near. It was Boone who asked the question. Do you regret it? She looked up. Regret what? Taking her place. She didn't answer right away. Instead she stood, walked to the shelf and picked up the bird carving. I didn't take her place, she said. I found mine. Boone nodded slowly. I'd marry you if you asked. She laughed softly. You're supposed to ask me. He shrugged. I've never been good with words. Then show me. He stood, crossed the room and took her hands in his. Calloused, warm, steady. No grand promises, he said. Just this. I'll be here. Every morning. Every season. Every word I don't know how to say, I'll try to show you. She didn't cry. But her answer was clear. In spring they planted lilacs along the fence line. Boone dug the holes. Maybelle pressed each root into the thawing ground with reverence. She spoke to them, softly as if they were children. Years from now, folks would say the Calder Ranch always smelled like lilacs after the last frost. No one spoke much about the switch, the sister who came, the one who left. But they remembered Maybelle. How she showed up quiet and stayed strong. How the fat rancher became less feared and more respected after the snow melted that year. And if you stood still enough near the porch at dusk, you might hear a woman's voice reading aloud to someone who didn't need the story, but liked the sound of her voice anyway. You might see 2 rocking chairs instead of 1. You might see a bird carving on a shelf near the fire. And you know, some stories begin with fire. But the ones that last? They grow in snow. If you ever feel like the wrong choice, the lesser name, the one who arrived after the door had already closed, listen close. Sometimes the best things in life aren't declared. They're revealed slowly like lilacs blooming under snow. And the hearts we think are closed may just be waiting for someone who knocks without fear and stays without asking.
The desert sang like an old woman mourning in her sleep. Wind carried whispers no one wanted to hear, dry stories of loss, of things buried and never prayed over. Beau McCrae rode with his hat pulled low and one hand on the reins, the other resting on the worn butt of his sidearm. He didn't expect company out here, just the steady rhythm of hooves crunching over sun-cracked earth and the creak of a saddle that had outlived better men. He wasn't out to fix anything, just replace a post. Some cattle had knocked loose during the sandstorm last night. That's what he told himself anyway. But Beau had taken to riding further these days, further from the town, from his own front porch, from the shape of a boy's shadow that never quite left the doorway. The sun dipped toward late afternoon, softening the hard edge of the land. In the distance, buzzards circled. Not unusual in these parts, but Beau's mare, Dusty, tossed her head, snorting at something ahead. He slowed her with a whisper, his body tensing without realizing why. That's when he heard it, thin as thread, almost, lost in the wind. A whimper, then a second. It wasn't animal. He dismounted, boots sinking into a patch of sand still warm from the day's heat. A patch of cacti loomed ahead, barrel cactus clustered like soldiers, standing guard. And there, between two of them, were shapes too small, too wrong. Two girls. They were slumped against the base of a cactus, wrists bound in rusted wire that glinted in the dying light. One had her head bowed, hair hanging in a matted curtain. The other raised her face at the sound of his steps. She was no older than 8, sunburned, dirt crusted to her cheeks. Her lips had split from dryness, but her eyes were wide, brown and scared clean through. "Don't hurt her," she whispered, voice rough from thirst. "Please." Beau's throat closed. "I ain't here to hurt nobody," he said gently, lowering himself. His hands didn't go for the wire first. They went to his canteen. The girl flinched as he offered it. Her sister stirred weakly but didn't speak. "It's water. You can drink it," he said, tilting the canteen until a drop touched her lips. She shuddered, then grabbed it with trembling hands. Beau worked fast after that, cut the wire with his knife, every motion careful, respectful. When he saw the blisters and dried blood on their small wrists, something twisted deep inside him, something old and aching. He wrapped the girls in his duster and lifted them, one under each arm, their bones too light for the weight of what they'd carried. As he mounted up, one of them whimpered, clutching his shirt. He held tighter. "Easy, darling. We're going home." Dusty turned westward, toward the town of Dry Creek, her pace steady despite the new burden. By the time they reached the edge of town, lamps were being lit in windows. Shadows stretched long across porches. Beau rode straight to the doctor's. Doc Harper, an older man with whiskey on his breath and a tired soul, met him on the porch. Beau didn't need to say a word. The girls said it all, faces half lost behind grime and fear. Doc whistled low. "Lord Almighty, where'd you find 'em?" "Out past the canyon bend, tied to a cactus. They'd have died by nightfall." Doc nodded slowly. "Bring 'em in." Beau laid them gently on the doctor's cot. Della, the quieter one, didn't open her eyes. Daisy, the one who'd spoken, clung to his arm until Doc assured her they'd just be washed and checked. Beau stayed in the hallway, leaning against the wall as voices murmured behind the door. Every minute felt like penance. Eunice Harper, Doc's sister, came down the stairs holding a towel, her face pinched tighter than usual. "You gonna tell the marshal?" she asked, arms crossed. "You think they was left on purpose?" Beau didn't answer right away. He studied the lantern flame dancing on the wall. "Somebody chained 'em," he said. "Didn't look like a mistake." "Well," Eunice sniffed, "they'll need a proper place. Boarding house might take 'em, if they..." Bathe proper and stay quiet. Bo turned. They're coming with me, Eunice blinked. With you? Bo, you live out by the ridge, alone, no woman in the house. What'll people say? Bo's gaze didn't waver. They'll say what they always do, then forget by next. Weak. He walked past her and opened the door. Doc was just finishing bandaging a skinned knee. The girls had been cleaned up a bit. Their cheeks were raw, eyes heavy. They'll sleep for a while, Doc said. No fever, thank the Lord. Bo looked at Daisy. You all right coming with me? She nodded without speaking. Della stirred, but didn't wake. Doc hesitated. You sure about this, Bo? Ain't a small thing. Neither was leaving them out there. He lifted them once more, bundled now in blankets. Rode back home slow, careful not to jostle them. The moon had risen, pale and quiet, by the time his cabin came into view. It wasn't much, just one room and a loft he didn't use, dust on shelves. A fire burned low in the hearth. He laid them near it, one on either side, and tucked quilts, or round their thin frames. They didn't say thank you, didn't need to. He didn't expect it. He boiled water, left some by their sides, put cornbread and beans in a dish nearby in case they woke hungry. Then he sat in the rocker near the fire, watching its orange tongue flicker in silence. The wind rose outside. Coyotes howled in the distance. He didn't sleep, just watched the shadows move, the blankets rise and fall with the girl's slow breathing. He was a man who had buried more than he had built, but tonight there were two souls under his roof who might make him try again. He didn't know their story yet. But he'd heard enough to know one thing. Someone had left them in the desert to die, and he wasn't about to let the wind have the rest of them. The first night, they didn't take their shoes off. Bo noticed it when he bent to cover them better, with the quilt, the firelight flickering soft across their faces. Their shoes, scuffed, too small, dry-creased and stiff, stayed planted against the floorboards like they feared the ground would vanish if they let go. He didn't touch them, just adjusted the blanket and stepped back. He didn't sleep that night either. He sat by the fire until the logs broke into coals, until the wind outside began to lose its voice. The desert night was sharp, and even inside the cabin, the air cooled toward dawn. He added another log, careful not to wake them. Della mumbled once in her sleep, a dry whisper that might have been Mama. Then silence again. By morning, the girls hadn't moved. Bo fixed a pan of corn mush and scrambled eggs, nothing fancy. He set out 2 small tin plates and his own, but didn't wake them. Let the scent of food do the asking. Sure enough, Daisy blinked awake first. Her face tensed as she remembered, but she said nothing, just nudged her sister until Della stirred beside her. They sat at the table stiff-backed, like they didn't know if they were allowed. Daisy took a fork, but Della used her fingers. They didn't speak, not to him or each other. Just ate like they were timing each bite, racing against the possibility that the food would vanish if they slowed down. Bo poured them water, then his own coffee. You two got names? He asked, gently. Daisy nodded but didn't offer hers. Della wiped her mouth on her sleeve and said, She's Daisy. I'm Della. He nodded. Bo. Just Bo. Della stared at him for a long beat, then turned her face back to her plate. They spent the day like survivors, not children. Bo gave them space. He went outside, fixed the chicken wire on the back fence, chopped firewood, kept one eye on the window. The girls watched from inside, faces small behind the glass. When he brought in firewood, he found them, sitting on the floor near the wall, as far from the door as they could manage. You don't gotta stay back there, he said, not unkindly. Ain't nobody coming to take you. Daisy looked up. You don't know that. He crouched, set the wood down slow. I don't. But I do know they'd have to come through me first. Della didn't speak, but her eyes flicked to his, hands, calloused, large, capable, then back to her lap. That afternoon he set out a washtub with warm water behind the cabin, turned his back while they took turns, washed their old clothes himself, laid them across the porch rail to dry in the sun, gave them one of his clean flannel shirts each to wear in the meantime, too big, but soft and warm. They didn't say thank you. He didn't ask for it. That night, they slept near the hearth again. Bo noticed the shoes, still on. He said nothing, just sat in the rocker, sharpening his knife by firelight. The next few days passed in a rhythm neither fast nor slow. Della barely spoke at all. She followed Daisy everywhere, shadow-like, and only answered when spoken to directly. Daisy talked more, but only in questions. What time's breakfast? Can we feed the horse? Why does your roof crack at night? Bo never answered with more than he needed to, but he let them help feed the chickens, showed them how to pump the well without spilling, let them brush Dusty's mane, even though she hated children. The mare tolerated them, snorted once, then stood still. That was a miracle in itself. Daisy laughed. It was quick and surprised, as if she hadn't heard her own laugh in a long while. It startled Bo. He didn't laugh back, just tipped his hat and said, "She likes you." One morning, Della drew something in the dirt with a stick. Bo saw it from the porch. It was a woman, bent over, long hair, a child at her skirt. The face was just a circle, no features. He didn't ask who it was. He already knew. At the feed store that afternoon, Bo stepped inside for flour and nails. The girls waited on the porch, huddled on the bench. Townsfolk watched. Eunice Harper stood just inside, her lips pursed like a scolding waiting to happen. "You mean to raise 'em?" she asked. Bo placed a tin of coffee on the counter. "Mean to keep 'em safe." Not the same thing. They got a roof, a fire and food. And a man with no wife and no future. Folks will talk. Bo looked at her flat. They always do. Behind her, Maybeth Lorne sorted mail in silence. She glanced up once, met his eyes. There was no judgment in hers, just a quiet understanding. She didn't speak, just slid a wrapped parcel across the counter. A book, no address, just a note for the girls. When he got home, he placed it on the table. Daisy found it first. She didn't say a word, but opened the pages like treasure. That night, Bo saw her reading aloud to Della under the flicker of lamplight, their voices soft. They still wore their shoes. A week passed before Della started talking more. It came suddenly, while Bo was cleaning his rifle. "Why'd they leave us?" The question hung like dust in still air. Bo set the cloth down. "Don't know. Some folks just ain't built right inside," Daisy whispered. "Mama tried to fight him." Bo turned. "Him?" Della nodded, eyes distant. "The man who chained us. He hit her. Then he said she could scream if she wanted. Nobody was listening." Bo's hands curled around the wood of the table. "Where's your mama now?" Neither answered. Daisy said, "We walked till we couldn't any more." Bo stood slowly, reached for a blanket, draped it around both of them. "You ain't walking no more. You're home now." It was the first time he said it out loud. That night, as the fire settled into a red hush and the wind died down, he checked the girls before. Della had kicked off her shoes. Daisy still wore hers, but she'd loosened the laces. It was enough. Bo sat in the rocker long after they slept. Not to guard, not out of duty, just to be near. And somewhere in that hush, something shifted. Not in them, but in him. A man who had once buried a son now. Watched two souls stitch themselves quietly into the seams of his world. They were still healing, still quiet. But tonight they slept with their shoes on, because some part of them still remembered pain, and another part, just starting to bloom, remembered comfort. The wind shifted east, the day Bo saddled up again. The girls had been with him nearly 2 weeks. Long enough for Della to hum while brushing Dusty, long enough for Daisy to forget to lace her shoes tight before bed. Long enough that Bo found himself making 2 cups of coffee in the morning instead of 1, just in case. Maybeth stopped by again with her quiet eyes and warm-bred silences, but Bo hadn't ridden back out to where he found them. Not once, until now. He didn't explain it to the girls, just told them he needed to check a line of fence down by the canyon bend. Della handed him a small apple wrapped in cloth. "In case you get hungry," she said. Her voice was barely above a breeze. Bo didn't say much back, just touched her shoulder. Light, like the way you'd close a book you weren't done reading, he rode out as the sun peeled back the edge of morning. The desert shimmered, its silence tight as a drum. Buzzards circled again above the canyon. Ridge, same as before. He tied Dusty to a low mesquite tree and walked the rest on foot. It didn't take long to find the place. The barrel cacti still stood, unmoved by time. But the ground told stories. Scattered footprints faded, wire twisted around a rock, and farther up, where the sand formed a shallow basin between the hills, something caught in the wind and tugged against a sage root. A piece of fabric. He moved. Closer. It was the hem of a calico dress, half buried, sand-stained and torn. He knelt, fingers brushing the dirt away gently, as if unwrapping a secret. The fabric was smeared with dried blood. Bo exhaled, slow, the kind of breath that carried memories you didn't live, but somehow still felt. He didn't need a grave. To know someone had tried to fight here, he saw it in the drag marks, the scuff of boots, the place where the earth dipped like a knee had struck hard. He stood, folding the torn dress carefully, not shaking it out, not wiping it clean, just holding it. Then he looked west, past the red ridgeline. "You fought," he murmured to no one. "They saw you fight." The ride back was slower. The wind picked up behind him, chasing dust devils across the flats. As he neared the cabin, he saw Daisy and Della sitting on the porch. Daisy shaded her eyes. Della ran to the gate when she spotted the cloth in his hand. "That's hers," she said. No question, just truth. Bo dismounted and gave it to her. Daisy came beside her sister, gripping the edge of the cloth. They didn't cry. Children like them didn't often have the luxury. That night, Bo hung the torn dress on the inside of the cabin door. He didn't say why, but neither girl questioned it. They just stared at it a moment before crawling into their quilts. Later, Bo found Daisy's boots by the hearth, left there on their side. For the first time. The next day, Maybeth arrived with a pie wrapped in a faded linen towel. She didn't say much, just handed it to Bo, then noticed the dress on the door. Her face changed, softened but not with pity. "You found her?" she asked. "No, just this." She stepped inside, looked around. "The girls are in the back?" Resting. She ran her hand along the table's edge. "You've done more than most would." Bo poured her coffee and set it before her. "I'm not trying to be a hero," he said quietly. "Just don't like ghosts getting left behind." She looked at him long and level. That's not what they'll remember. He wasn't sure what she meant by they, the girls, the town, or the ghosts. Maybeth left before sunset. As she reached the porch, she paused. "There's a service next Sunday for the children lost in the valley flood last year. Might be good for them to go. Might be good for you too." Bo nodded, unsure if he'd go. He'd stopped attending church after they buried his boy. The pews had felt too tight with judgment, too empty of answers. That night, Della spoke up as Bo was dousing the lantern. "She sang to us," she said suddenly. Bo turned, surprised. "Your mama?" Della nodded. "When she thought we were sleeping, she used to hum something about a lonesome dove." Daisy whispered, "I miss her hands." Bo didn't know what to say to that, so he pulled the girls' quilts tighter and left the lamp burning just a little longer. He stood by the window, staring into the desert beyond. The sky above was a dark sheet stitched with stars. Somewhere out there, a woman had fought and bled and been buried by wind. Somewhere, a man still breathed who had done it. And Bo knew now. He couldn't rest until he found out who. 2 days. Later, Ezra Baines came riding up with dust on his coat and the kind of look that meant trouble. Bo met him at the gate. Ezra dismounted slowly, adjusting his belt. "You hear from anyone about them girls?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the house. Bo stiffened. "No. Why?" Ezra took a folded letter from his saddlebag. "Some man wrote from down south, says he's kin, wants to claim them, says they're his brother's kids." Bo's eyes darkened. "What else did he say?" "Says he's got papers, says you're harboring them. Letter don't sit right with me. Too clean, too prepared. But it's the law to follow it through." Bo's jaw tightened. Those girls were chained up and left to die. No man that'd allow that deserves a say. Ezra met his eyes. "I don't disagree, but if he comes, and he's got a marshal from El Paso at his back, we'll have a problem." Bo didn't answer, just looked back at the cabin, at the dress still hanging quiet on the door. Ezra placed a hand on his shoulder. "You got little time, use it well." And with that, he rode off. Bo stood there long after the dust of Ezra's horse disappeared down the trail. Inside, the girls were laughing over something Daisy read from Maybeth's book. Their voices floated out the window like birds discovering their wings. He couldn't let that be taken from them. Not again. He stepped inside. The girls looked up, their joy flickering as they saw his face. "What's wrong?" Daisy asked. Bo shook his head, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing. Just thinking I might need to build y'all a proper room." Della's eyes lit. "With a window." "Yeah," he said, "with a window." But in his heart, he was already making plans that had nothing to do with hammers or nails. He was going to find out exactly who had left that woman to bleed in the sand, and he wasn't going to wait on anyone else to bring him justice. It was a Thursday when the stranger arrived. The town square was baking under a high noon sun, wind tossing dust across boardwalks and making church bells moan. Bo had just returned from the West Ridge, sweat streaking his collar and dust caking his boots. He saw the man before the man saw him, standing by the water trough, dressed too neat for someone claiming to be kin of girls left to die. Tall, slick black hair, mustache trimmed like a banker's. He wore a suit 2 sizes too fine for the desert and carried a rolled paper like a prize ticket, eyes cold as a poker table. Name was Clayton Morrow. He walked into the sheriff's office like he owned something. Ezra greeted him with guarded politeness, but Bo could see it in the marshal's jaw. The man rubbed wrong against his soul, too. Bo waited out front, leaning against a post. The girls were safe at the schoolhouse. Maybeth had taken them there for the day, a quiet offer Bo accepted without a word. When Clayton finally stepped outside, he looked Bo over like a problem he'd already solved. "I reckon you're the one. Calling yourself their guardian." Bo didn't move. "I don't call myself anything, I just didn't leave them to die." Clayton smiled, thin. "You've made a sentimental mess out of this, Mr. McCrae, but it don't change blood. I'm their uncle, by law and by paper." Ezra stepped between them before it turned into something more. "There'll be a hearing," the marshal said. "Town square tomorrow?" Clayton tipped his hat like he'd just closed a business deal. "I'll see you there." Bo watched him walk away, and every step the man took raised a wind of old anger behind Bo's ribs. That night, the girls sat quiet through supper. Della picked at her biscuit. Daisy stared at the fire like it might answer something for her. "He's here, ain't he?" Daisy finally asked. "The one who chained us?" Bo looked up. "He's saying he's your uncle." "He's not," Della whispered. "He said if Mama made more noise, he'd throw us in the pit with her." Bo reached across the table and covered her hand. "He's not taking you." They didn't nod, but they didn't look away. The next morning, the town square filled before the sun crested high. Bo walked the girls in hand, their hair brushed, their dresses plain but clean. The church bell rang once. Eunice Harper stood with arms folded like a judgment carved in wood. Others clustered near the general store, pretending not to stare but leaning just enough. Ezra stood near the fountain, which hadn't worked in years. A flat platform had been set up in front of it, more show than structure. Clayton stood on it already, arms folded, papers in hand. He looked like a lawyer, though he wasn't one, just a man who knew how to twist truth into ropes. Bo stepped up beside him. The girls stood behind, their hands clasped. Ezra cleared his throat. "We're here to hear a claim of kinship. One Clayton Morrow says he's legal uncle to Della and Daisy, says they belong with him. Bo McCrae here says otherwise. This town's not the court, but until Mesquite sends a judge, we'll hold this hearing fair and seen." Clayton stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man," he pointed at Bo, "is keeping two girls who ain't his. No schooling, no church, no law behind it. I've got blood, and I've got these." He waved the papers like scripture. Bo said nothing. At first, just looked at the crowd, at Eunice, at Maybeth, standing on the edge with her hands clasped around her Bible. Then at the girls. They were chained to a cactus, Bo said, voice low, left with no water, no hope. Whoever tied them up wanted them dead. He turned to Clayton. "You say you're kin. Where were you?" Clayton laughed. "That's not relevant." "I've been searching." Della stepped forward. "You weren't looking." Gasps rippled. Clayton's smile froze. Della's voice trembled, but did not break. "You were there. Mama screamed. You said if we cried, we'd get worse. We didn't. Forget." Clayton turned pale under the sun. "She's just a child." Ezra stepped forward, tone steel. "Children don't lie about fear. Not like that." Eunice stirred. Others murmured. Townsfolk looked at one another, unsure now. The tension was a storm, thick in the heat. Daisy stepped up beside her sister. "Mama said we'd find someone kind. She said if she couldn't come back, we had to run. So we did." The square went quiet. Not even the wind dared speak. Bo stepped back, giving them space. His eyes were glassed, but he didn't blink. Maybeth stepped forward now, her voice quiet, sure. "I've seen them in the schoolhouse. They laugh again, they read, they sleep without screaming. If that's not proof of where they belong, I don't know what is." Clayton's voice rose, shrill and slick. "This is a witch trial, not a court. That man's a widower with no income, no structure. You let emotions run law, you'll ruin the whole system." Ezra raised a hand. "You want Mesquite to rule, fine. Till then, they stay with Bo." Clayton stepped down fast, spitting dust. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "This town's gonna choke on its own self-righteousness." No one stopped him. No one spoke for him. He rode out an hour later, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and a memory that would sour the wind for a while. As the crowd dispersed, folks avoided Bo's eyes. Some nodded. A few touched his shoulder in passing, but it was Maybeth who stood longest. "They did right," she said. "And so did you." Bo looked down at the girls, one on each side of him. They weren't smiling, but they were standing. "They did more than me," he said. "You made room for them to do it," she replied. That evening, the girls ran ahead to the cabin. Bo stood a moment on the porch with Maybeth. "I ain't got much," he said. "Barely enough to hold myself steady some days." "You don't need much," she said, eyes soft. "You just need to stay." Inside, Della had set the table. Daisy was placing the pie Maybeth had brought last week at the center, careful not to spill. Bo looked at the dress, still hanging on the wall. The wind had tugged one edge loose. He walked over, smoothed it flat again. He would leave it there. A reminder, not of pain, but of what pain tried to steal and failed. That night he slept deeper than he had in years, and in the corner beside the hearth sat two pairs of shoes, lined up, clean and empty, because for the first time the girls didn't need them close. They were staying. It began with a ribbon. Bo found it caught in the thorn bush outside the barn, sky blue, frayed on one end, the kind a mother might tie in her daughter's hair before church. He didn't know how long it had been there. Wind must have blown it in from the canyon rim, or maybe it had waited, like memory, buried and patient, until it was time to be found. He turned it over in his palm, then carried it inside. Daisy gasped when she saw it. That was Mama's. She put it in Della's hair before... Her voice trailed off, caught between sorrow and reverence. Della reached for it, silent as always, but her fingers lingered when Bo placed it in her hand. She held it like something holy. Bo didn't say much, but something shifted in his chest, a weight, not lifted, but named. That night, he sat at the edge of the girls' quilts and asked, not to pry, but to honor. "Tell me about her." Daisy smiled softly, the kind of smile made of ache. She liked violets, sang real quiet like she didn't want to disturb the stars. Della added, "She had a scar on her arm, said it came from falling off a mule. But we think it was from..." "Papa," Bo didn't correct her. "Did she believe in heaven?" he asked. "She used to say heaven was just peace," Daisy said, "and peace was a porch with no fear on it." But sat with that for a long time. The next day he rode out alone again, this time not to find but to finish. The canyon where he'd found the girls looked different now, softer somehow, as if time had peeled the rage off the rocks and left only the shape of what mattered. He found the basin where the torn dress had been. The wind had swept most of it bare, but Bo brought stones. He laid them in a careful circle, each one placed like a word in a prayer. He dug the earth himself. Slow, deliberate, the way you dig when the dead deserve remembering. He left no cross, just the blue ribbon, tied to a cedar branch and planted upright beside the stones, a marker not of ownership, but of love. He didn't speak, just stood until the wind took his hat and he let it. When he returned to town, the whispers had grown soft. Ezra met him outside the sheriff's office, a folded telegram in his hand. "Clayton's been arrested," he said simply. "Caught selling fake guardianship claims in Arizona territory. Faces 5 years minimum." Bo didn't smile, just nodded. Justice, when it came late, was a quiet thing. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The girls settled into school. Maybeth visited more often. She didn't bring flowers or grand ideas, just presents and warm bread, and the kind of silence that makes a place feel safe. The town held its spring gathering that month. A church, picnic, something to bring the people together after a bitter season. Bo didn't intend to go. He'd never been one for crowds. But when Daisy came into the barn wearing her mother's ribbon, tied new in her hair, and asked if he'd come see her sing with the other children, he said yes without thinking. The square was dusted clean, tables stretched with cloths and pies, and nervous hope. Folks glanced at Bo, some with hesitation, but more now with respect. Not loud, not announced, but earned. Daisy sang shyly with the schoolchildren, standing one shoulder behind Della. Bo watched from the back, arms crossed, heart clenched. It wasn't her voice that undid him. It was the way she reached for her sister's hand halfway through the song, like a tether to something sacred. And then it happened. When the songs were done, Maybeth stood on the small platform and, to everyone's surprise, called Bo forward. He froze. She didn't ask, just gestured. He walked slow, every step louder than applause. Maybeth spoke gently. "This town's seen a great many things, but not often do we see a man do what no law asked of him. Take. In 2 broken girls, patch their spirits like quilts, and ask for nothing back." She turned to Bo. "You didn't rescue them with guns or grand speeches. You did it with warm bread, clean blankets, a place at the table." A hush fell. One by one, people began to stand. Ezra, Eunice, then Doc Harper, then others. The entire town stood. Della stepped forward from the crowd, her shoes clean, her dress pressed. In her hand a folded paper. She gave it to Bo. "We wrote this." He unfolded it, hands shaking slightly. "To the man who saved us without asking, who gave us peace when we thought there was none. We love you, and we are yours, if you'll have us." Signed, Daisy and Della. Bo's throat closed. He knelt to them. "You're Mine already. The crowd didn't cheer. They wept, quietly, openly. Even Eunice, who'd never approved of much, dabbed her eyes with the lace handkerchief she pretended wasn't wet. That night, Bo carried the girls home. One in each arm, though. They were getting too big for that. Maybeth walked beside him, her hand brushing his once, then staying there. When they reached the porch, Bo paused. The wind had quieted. The stars blinked down like old friends. Della looked up. "Can we stay forever?" Bo looked at Maybeth, at the home that had been too quiet, at the two souls who had filled it. "Yes," he said, "forever and a day." Inside, the hearth glowed. The cabin smelled of cinnamon and old wood. Bo sat in his rocker as the girls fell asleep curled beneath quilts they'd helped sew. Maybeth leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Never thought I'd see this," she said. "What's that?" "A man who gave so much," she said, "and somehow ended up with more." Bo didn't answer, just looked at the girls, their faces soft in sleep, their chests rising in rhythm with peace, and for the first time in years, he believed it. Peace wasn't far off or unreachable. It was a porch, with no fear on it. If you walk through Dry Creek now, folks won't tell you much about Bo McCrae. They'll point to the house with flowers blooming wild at the gate, where laughter spills like water. They might say he was quiet, odd, a little broken. But they'll say this too: what he did made the whole town cry, because in a land of dust and drought, sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stay, and sometimes love doesn't arrive loud. It arrives barefoot, holding a ribbon,